The evidence presented leaves no room for doubt. We have proven beyond a reasonable shadow that the defense's claims are entirely baseless.
The morning I realized my marriage was already dead, the coffee tasted burned. Not strong, not bitter, just wrong. I stood in my kitchen holding a chipped mug, staring at the wall clock like it had personally betrayed me. The second hand kept moving, loud as a heartbeat I didn't ask for. "You ready?" my husband asked. His voice was light, almost cheerful. I didn't answer. He adjusted his cufflinks in the reflection of the microwave door, smooth and confident, like today was a promotion instead of a divorce hearing. He didn't look at me, he never did anymore, didn't need to. "Court's at 10, he continued. "Let's not be late, judges hate late people." I watched him, really watched him. The man I married was gone. In his place stood someone polished, smug, and already counting money that didn't belong to him. Today was supposed to be the day he finished me. I took a slow sip of coffee and felt it burn my tongue. I welcomed it. Pain kept me present. "You should have taken the settlement," he said casually, like we were talking about groceries. "That was generous, all things considered." I finally looked up. Generous. He meant the offer that would have left me with nothing but my clothes and a quiet humiliation. The offer that assumed I was stupid because I stayed calm, soft because I stayed silent. I set the mug down carefully. "Let's go," I said. He smiled then, the kind of smile that used to charm rooms. The kind that now made my stomach turn. As we walked toward the door, he paused, keys dangling from his fingers. "Oh," he added almost as an afterthought, "don't embarrass yourself today. Just listen to your lawyer and keep it short." His mistress waited downstairs. I knew that already. She'd made sure I knew. I stepped into the hallway, my heels clicking softly against the tile, and felt something inside me settle into place. Not anger, not fear, clarity, because the truth was this: he thought today was the end. But for me, today was the beginning, and he had no idea what I brought with me, not tears, not apologies, receipts. He used to call me easy, not easy to love, easy to manage. I cooked, I listened, I stayed home. I made sure the lights were on and the fridge was full and his suits were pressed just right. I built a quiet life around him and never asked for applause. That was my mistake. Men like him confuse peace with weakness. When we first met, he loved telling people what I did for work. "She's good with numbers," he'd say, laughing. "Real good, keeps us honest." What he meant was, she won't ask questions. He didn't understand that numbers don't lie and I don't forget them. While he climbed and strutted and soaked up praise, I tracked everything in my head. Rent, groceries, transfers, dates, patterns. I noticed when his stories stopped lining up with his bank notifications, when work trips started costing more than our mortgage, but I said nothing because silence makes people sloppy. By the time I found the first piece of proof, I already knew there would be more. I didn't cry when I saw it, didn't scream. I opened my laptop. That's when everything changed. People think revenge is loud. It isn't. Real revenge is patient. While he slept beside me, I worked. While he texted someone else, I organized files. I didn't dig randomly, I followed trails. Numbers leave footprints if you know how to read them. Money moved in strange ways, too fast, too hidden, and then there it was, my grandmother's money, the inheritance I'd trusted him with, the down payment he loved claiming as his. Sitting right where I knew it would be, misnamed, misdirected, but traceable. I documented everything, every transfer, every date, every lie. By the time he told me he was done waiting and that the apartment was his, I already knew the truth. He wasn't the provider, I was the foundation, and foundations don't crumble quietly. The courthouse smelled like old paper and nerves. He walked in like a king, expensive suit, relaxed shoulders, confidence dripping from him like cologne. I walked in steady, my lawyer squeezed my arm once. "Let him talk," he whispered. Oh, he talked about how he earned everything, about how I contributed nothing, about how generosity was wasted on women like me. I listened. Because arrogance always overplays its hand. And when it was finally our turn to speak, when the room shifted and the judge looked up, I opened my folder. The courtroom felt colder than the hallway, like the air itself didn't care who won or lost. Wooden benches, beige walls, a judge who looked like she'd seen every version of heartbreak and greed possible. He sat across from me, relaxed, too relaxed. His lawyer leaned back in his chair, legs crossed, confidence spilling everywhere. They both thought this was routine, another quiet woman about to walk away with less than she deserved. The judge cleared her throat. "Let's begin." His lawyer stood first. Your Honor, this is a very straightforward case. Of course it was to them. He talked about income, about careers, about traditional roles. He said words like non-working spouse and primary provider like they were facts carved in stone. I watched my husband nod along. He didn't even look at me. Not once. I wondered how many times he'd practiced this version of the story in his head, where he was the hero, where I was background noise. When the lawyer finished, the judge turned to us. Defense. My lawyer stood slowly, not rushed. Not nervous. He opened the folder. Paper makes a very specific sound when it moves in a silent room. Dry, sharp, final. Your Honor, he said calmly, this case is only straightforward if we ignore the facts. That got their attention. He began with the apartment, the down payment, the inheritance, the dates. I watched my husband's posture shift just slightly, like something in his spine remembered a detail he hoped had disappeared. My lawyer handed the judge the first document. Here is proof the down payment came from my client's inheritance, not joint funds, not marital income. The judge leaned forward. My husband's lawyer frowned. That money went through my client's account, he interrupted quickly. Which proves, it proves nothing, my lawyer replied evenly, except convenience. He slid another document forward, bank statements, timestamps matching amounts. You could feel the room change. Confidence doesn't vanish all at once, it cracks. My husband finally looked at me then, really looked. His eyes searched my face, confused, like he was seeing a stranger sitting where his wife used to be. The judge asked him directly, do you dispute this evidence? He opened his mouth, closed it. His lawyer jumped in, talking faster now, grasping. They moved on to monthly payments, who paid, how, from where. My lawyer laid it all out. Every transfer I made, every note I added, every month on time without fail. I saw sweat gather at my husband's temple. He'd never checked, never cared. The judge took notes. Then came the spending, and that's when things stopped being polite. Restaurants that didn't match business trips, hotels on dates he claimed to be alone, jewelry receipts that never came home. The room went very quiet. My lawyer didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Truth doesn't shout. When the gambling transactions came up, my husband's jaw tightened. His hands curled into fists under the table. The judge's expression hardened. Do you deny these transactions? She asked. He swallowed. They were entertainment, he said weakly. I almost laughed. Entertainment is a movie, a dinner, not thousands disappearing into nothing. By the time my lawyer finished, the confident man who walked in that morning was gone. In his place sat someone smaller, cornered. And for the first time since I married him, I realized something important. He never thought I would fight back. He thought silence meant surrender. He was wrong, and the worst part for him. This was only the middle of the story. There's a moment in every courtroom where confidence dies. It doesn't collapse dramatically. It doesn't scream. It hesitates. After my lawyer finished laying out the spending records, the judge leaned back in her chair and adjusted her glasses. She didn't speak right away. She didn't need to. Silence does more damage than words ever could. My husband shifted in his seat. The expensive fabric of his suit creased awkwardly at the shoulders like it no longer fit him. His lawyer whispered something urgently, leaning close, voice tight. I didn't need to hear it to know what it was. We didn't prepare for this. The judge finally spoke. Mr. Harris, she said, addressing my husband directly, you've claimed full financial responsibility for this marriage. These records suggest otherwise. He cleared his throat. I paid the bills, he said quickly. I handled everything. She just sent money when she could. That lie was thin, transparent. My lawyer didn't interrupt. He waited, then he stood again. Your Honor, he said, if my client just sent money when she could, then the court may want to see how consistent that generosity was. He passed over another document, a chart, month by month, exact amounts, same day. Same memo, mortgage, utilities, groceries, emergency savings. The judge studied it carefully. I watched her eyes move left to right, line by line. I knew that look. It was the look of someone checking math they already suspected would add up. Across the room, my husband's confidence drained visibly. He started rubbing his palms against his thighs, slow at first, then faster. When the judge looked up again, her tone had changed. These payments are not occasional, she said. They are systematic. My husband shook his head. She was helping. That doesn't mean. It means, the judge cut in, that the financial narrative you presented is incomplete. That word landed heavy. Incomplete. My lawyer took the opening. Incomplete is a generous description, he said calmly. We haven't yet discussed where the rest of Mr. Harris's income went. My husband froze, the judge's eyebrow lifted slightly. Go on. And this was where the air truly shifted. My lawyer began listing dates, not all at once. Slowly, hotel stays that overlapped with business travel, flights booked for two, restaurants billed late at night in cities he claimed he'd never visited. The judge's pen stopped moving. My husband's lawyer tried to object, but his voice lacked conviction now. The judge waved him off. What is the relevance? She asked sharply. The relevance, my lawyer replied, is that marital funds were used for purposes that did not benefit the marriage. There it was. The phrase that changes everything. My husband finally looked panicked. That's not fair, he blurted out. She didn't even know about those expenses. The judge stared at him. Exactly. That one word echoed louder than any gavel. I felt something settle deep in my chest. Not joy, not revenge, validation. For years I'd doubted my instincts. Told myself I was overthinking. Told myself trust meant not checking too closely. Now every line, every number, every truth was standing where it belonged. My husband leaned back, exhaling sharply like someone realizing too late they'd been holding their breath underwater. The judge closed the folder. We'll take a brief recess, she said. I suggest all parties consider the seriousness of what's been presented. As she stood and left the bench, the room buzzed softly with murmurs. My husband didn't look at me, not because he was angry, but because he was afraid. And I realized something as we waited there, suspended in that moment. This wasn't about winning anymore. It was about accountability. And for the first time, he understood the truth wasn't rushing to destroy him. It was walking, slow, certain, and impossible to stop. During recess, nobody spoke to me, not my husband, not his lawyer, not even the people sitting nearby pretending not to listen while listening anyway. I sat still, hands folded in my lap, breathing slow. I'd learned that stillness makes people uncomfortable. They expect tears or shaking or anger. They don't know what to do with calm. Across the room, my husband paced. He took off his jacket, draped it over the back of the chair, then put it back on again like it could protect him. His phone buzzed once. He checked it. Froze. I didn't need to see the screen to know who it was. She had a way of sensing when his world tilted. His lawyer pulled him aside, whispering sharply now, no longer confident. Hands moved. Fingers pointed toward me, then toward the judge's empty bench. I caught one phrase. This is worse than we thought. I almost smiled. Almost, because for the first time in years the truth was louder than his voice. The judge returned sooner than expected. Her expression had hardened like she'd made up her mind about something important. We will continue, she said. My husband sat quickly, spine stiff, face pale. The man who walked in earlier like he owned the room now looked like he was borrowing space. My lawyer stood again. Your Honor, he said, there is one more issue relevant to asset division. My husband's head snapped up. I felt the tension ripple through him. This court has heard about spending, my lawyer continued. But not about income, the judge nodded slowly. Proceed. And just like that, the room tipped forward. My lawyer didn't accuse, didn't dramatize. He presented patterns, money that didn't match salary, deposits with no clear source. Withdrawals timed too precisely to be coincidence. My husband shook his head repeatedly. That's not, those are bonuses, reimbursements. Then they should be documented, the judge said coolly. They weren't. My lawyer passed over the final stack. The thick one, this was the part that hurt, not because I felt sorry for him, but because it meant closing the door forever. Because once this was said out loud, there was no pretending we were ever partners again. The judge skimmed the pages. Her jaw tightened. Mr. Harris, she said slowly, these records suggest income that was never disclosed on joint filings. Silence, heavy, suffocating. My husband opened his mouth, then stopped. His lawyer looked like he wanted to disappear. I can explain, my husband said finally, voice cracking. The judge leaned forward. I suggest you choose your words carefully. And that was it. That was the moment. The moment I saw it in his eyes, the realization that this wasn't just about losing money or property. It was about exposure, about consequences, about the cost of assuming the woman beside you will never look closely. The judge closed the file. This court does not take financial deception lightly, she said. We will recess again before issuing a decision. My husband slumped back in his chair, defeated. As we stood to leave the room, he finally looked at me, really looked. His voice dropped to a whisper. "Why didn't you just leave?" I met his gaze, steady and quiet. "Because you thought I was nothing," I said softly, "and I needed you to understand how wrong you were." We walked out of the courtroom, the door closing behind us with a dull, final sound. And I knew, whatever happened next, nothing would ever go back to the way it was. The hallway outside the courtroom felt narrower than before, like the walls had leaned in to listen. People passed by in low murmurs, carrying their own problems in manila folders and tired faces, but none of that touched me. I felt suspended, not anxious, not hopeful, just still. My husband sat on the bench across from me, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor like it might open and swallow him whole. His phone buzzed again. This time he didn't answer it. He just stared at the screen, jaw clenched, then shoved it back into his pocket. Whatever fantasy he'd built was cracking from all sides. I leaned back and closed my eyes for a moment, not to escape, but to remember. I remembered the version of myself who used to wait by the window when he said he'd be late. The woman who explained away missed calls, who convinced herself that trust meant swallowing questions. That woman felt very far away now. Time passed strangely in that hallway. 5 minutes felt like 30, 30 felt like 5. I focused on my breathing, slow and steady, like my lawyer taught me. Let the truth do the work. My lawyer sat beside me, calm as ever, flipping through notes he no longer needed. "No matter what happens," he said quietly, "you did everything right." I nodded. Across the hall, my husband finally spoke. "Can we talk?" he asked. His voice sounded smaller than I'd ever heard it. I opened my eyes and looked at him, not sharply, not coldly, just honestly. "What is there left to say?" I asked. He swallowed. I didn't know you kept track of things like that." I almost laughed. "I kept track because I cared," I said. "You stopped because you didn't." He ran a hand over his face. "I never meant for it to go this far." "That's the problem," I replied softly. "You never meant for anything, you just took." He opened his mouth again, but footsteps echoed down the hall, cutting the moment short. The bailiff appeared at the end of the corridor, all parties back inside. We stood. As we walked back into the courtroom, I felt something settle in my chest, not nerves, not fear, acceptance. The judge returned, her expression unreadable. Everyone stood until she sat. "This court has reviewed the evidence," she began. My husband held his breath. I could hear it. She spoke slowly, carefully, like each word mattered. "Assets, responsibility, accountability, the apartment, mine. The debts incurred without my consent. His compensation for funds taken from the marriage. Granted." Each ruling landed like a quiet bell, ringing the end of something long overdue. By the time she finished, my husband looked hollowed out. Like the version of himself he'd believed in had finally been disproven. The judge closed the file. "This matter is concluded." The gavel came down, and just like that, it was over. In the hallway again, my husband leaned against the wall, staring at nothing. His phone buzzed one last time. He answered it this time, voice shaking. I didn't need to hear the words to know what they were. Lost travels fast. I walked past him, my footsteps steady, my back straight. At the courthouse doors, sunlight broke through the clouds, sudden and warm. I paused there, breathing in air that felt new. Behind me, something ended. Ahead of me, everything waited. And for the first time in a very long time, I wasn't afraid of the quiet. Continue here is part 9, long and immersive, 500+ words, where consequences start unfolding outside the courtroom and the emotional weight deepens. The tone stays calm, reflective, and powerful, with a strong retention pull at the end. The courthouse doors shut behind me with a heavy thud, like punctuation at the end of a sentence that took years to finish. Outside, the air smelled like rain and concrete. Cars rushed past, people laughed somewhere nearby. Life kept moving, careless and loud, while my world quietly rearranged itself. I stood there for a moment, letting it all settle. I didn't feel victorious. I felt empty in a clean way, like a room that's been cleared out after holding too much for too long. My lawyer shook my hand. "You did well," he said. "Most people don't have the patience to let truth unfold." I thanked him and watched him disappear down the steps. When I turned back, I saw my husband come out behind me. He didn't look like the man I married. His shoulders sagged. His tie hung loose. The confidence that once wrapped around him like armor was gone, stripped clean in public. He spotted me and hesitated like he wasn't sure he was allowed to speak to me anymore. Then his phone rang. This time I heard the voice on the other end, sharp, clipped, official. He turned away, pacing, hands trembling. I caught fragments. "What do you mean frozen? I can explain. This is a misunderstanding." His face drained of color. I didn't wait to hear the rest. Some endings don't need witnesses. I walked to my car, the same one I'd bought before marriage, before compromise, before shrinking myself to make space for someone else's ego. I sat behind the wheel and rested my forehead against it for a moment. That's when the shaking started, not fear, not regret, release. I breathed through it slowly until it passed. On the drive home, memories tried to surface, holidays, promises, the version of us that laughed on the couch and talked about futures that never came. I didn't push them away, I let them come. And then I let them go. When I reached the apartment, the key turned smoothly in the lock. My door. Inside, the silence felt different now, not lonely, peaceful. I kicked off my shoes and stood barefoot on the cool floor. Every room looked the same but felt entirely new, like a space that finally belonged to me. Later that evening, my phone buzzed, a message from him. "Please, I don't know what to do. They fired me. Everything's gone." I stared at the screen for a long time, then I turned the phone face down, not out of cruelty, out of necessity, because saving him had always meant losing myself. I made tea, sat by the window. Watched the city lights blink on one by one. Somewhere out there he was realizing that charm doesn't replace character, that silence doesn't mean ignorance, that the woman he underestimated was the one holding the balance the whole time. I took a slow sip and closed my eyes. Tomorrow I'd wake up alone, and for the first time that thought didn't scare me. It felt like freedom, quiet, earned, and finally mine. But freedom, I would soon learn, has a way of asking one last question. The next morning didn't feel like a victory. It felt quiet, too quiet. I woke before the alarm, sunlight slipping through the blinds in thin, careful lines. For a moment, I forgot everything. Court, papers, decisions. I reached across the bed out of habit, then stopped. The other side was cold. I lay there staring at the ceiling, realizing something strange. I wasn't sad. That surprised me. I got up, made breakfast, and ate standing at the counter like I used to when life felt uncertain. Eggs, toast, no rush. The world hadn't ended. It hadn't even paused. That's when the knock came. 3 sharp taps at the door, not loud. Not polite, urgent. My chest tightened, not with fear but instinct. I opened the door slowly. 2 men stood there in plain jackets, professional, calm, the kind of calm that means they already know the answers. "Ma'am," one said, holding up an ID, "we need to ask you a few questions regarding your former husband." Former, the word still felt new. I let them in. They didn't sit. They didn't accuse. They asked about accounts, about transfers, about documents I'd submitted. I answered honestly, carefully, the way I always did. Then one of them said something that made my hands go cold. "Did you know," he asked gently, "that your testimony may have prevented a much larger investigation from going unnoticed?" I looked at him. "What do you mean?" He exchanged a glance with his partner. "There were irregularities we were already monitoring. Your records confirmed patterns we hadn't fully connected yet. So it was bigger, not just my marriage. Not just my money." I nodded slowly. "I didn't do this to punish him." "We know," the man replied. "You did it to protect yourself." They left soon after, polite and efficient, like a storm that never quite arrives but changes the air anyway. I stood in the living room long after the door closed. That's when my phone rang again, not a text this time, a call. I hesitated, then answered. His voice sounded hollow. "They took my accounts," he said. "Everything's frozen. I can't even access my email." I closed my eyes. "I told them the truth," he continued quickly. "About the money, about the mistakes. I said you didn't know." "I did know," I said quietly. Silence. "Then, why didn't you stop me?" That question landed harder than all the others. I thought about it. About the nights I stayed quiet, the trust I gave freely, the belief that love would be enough. "Because," I said slowly, "you never listened when I tried." He exhaled shakily. "I thought you needed me." I almost smiled. "I needed honesty," I replied. "You needed control." The call ended shortly after. I didn't cry. Instead, I walked through the apartment, touching the walls, the counters, the windows. The space felt grounded now, real, mine, but something else stirred beneath that calm, a question. If I'd been strong enough all along, why did it take losing everything to see it? That night, as I lay in bed, I understood something important. justice closes doors, but healing asks you to walk through the silence afterward. And I wasn't done yet, not with him but with myself. There's a lie we don't talk about enough. The lie that says strength shows up only when everything explodes. It doesn't. Sometimes strength is what you ignore for years. After the calls stopped and the apartment settled back into its nightly hum, I sat alone on the couch with the lights off. The city glowed outside the windows like a separate universe, one where people laughed, argued, lived without knowing my name or my story. And for the first time since the divorce, I asked myself a question I'd been avoiding. Why did I stay so long? Not because of love, not because of fear, but because leaving would have forced me to admit something painful. That I'd seen the cracks early and chose comfort over confrontation. I replayed moments I'd buried. The first time money didn't add up. The first lie I noticed but ignored. The first time my intuition whispered, "Pay attention." I remembered how I dismissed myself. "You're overthinking, don't make problems, be patient." I'd confused loyalty with silence. That realization hurt more than the betrayal, because it meant I wasn't just wronged. I participated by minimizing my own voice. I didn't say that to punish myself. I said it because growth doesn't come from pretending you were perfect. It comes from honesty. I went into the bedroom and opened the closet. Half of it was empty now, his suit's gone, his shoes, his scent. What remained was space. And space can be uncomfortable when you're not used to standing fully in it. I sat on the bed and let the weight of it all come down, not dramatically, not with tears. Just a slow heaviness settling into my chest. I whispered out loud, "I should have trusted myself." The room didn't answer, but something inside me did. It said, "You will now." The next day I took a walk without headphones, no music. No distractions, just the sound of my footsteps and my breathing. I passed couples holding hands, women walking confidently alone, men arguing on the phone. Everyone looked ordinary, and yet everyone was carrying something invisible. I realized something then. This wasn't just my ending. It was a reset, not into bitterness, not into independence for the sake of pride, but into clarity. I didn't want revenge anymore. I didn't want apologies. I didn't even want closure from him. I wanted alignment with myself. That evening I wrote a list, not of what I lost, but of what I learned. Silence is not peace. Love without honesty is debt. Being low maintenance often means being undervalued, and intuition doesn't scream, it waits. When I finished, I folded the paper and put it in the drawer beside my bed, not as a reminder of pain, but as proof of growth. Because the truth is, the hardest lesson wasn't that he betrayed me, it was that I stopped advocating for myself long before he ever did. And now I knew better, but knowing something doesn't mean you're done with it. It means the real work is about to begin. Healing doesn't arrive with fireworks. It comes in small, ordinary moments that don't announce themselves. A week after everything ended, I stood in the grocery store staring at 2 brands of tea for way too long. Chamomile or mint? I smiled to myself when I realized why I was stuck. No one was waiting on me. No one was texting asking how long I'd be. No one would complain about the choice. That freedom felt unfamiliar, like a coat that didn't quite fit yet. At home, I started noticing things I'd ignored for years. The way sunlight hit the living room in the late afternoon. The hum of the refrigerator. The piece of dishes drying in silence. Silence used to scare me. It felt like abandonment. Now it felt like space. Not every day was easy. Some mornings I woke up heavy, like my body remembered before my mind did. On those days, I moved slower. I let myself be quiet without calling it weakness. I stopped explaining my choices to people who didn't need explanations. Friends reached out, some carefully, some awkwardly. A few disappeared when the drama faded. I didn't chase them. Loss clarifies. One evening, while organizing old files, I found a folder labeled Future Plans. Inside were notes about vacations we never took, savings goals that only existed on paper, names for children that never came. I sat on the floor with those papers spread around me, and I let myself grieve. Not him, the version of myself who believed patience alone could save a relationship. I folded the papers neatly, then threw them away. That wasn't erasing history, that was releasing it. A few days later, I ran into someone from my past, an old coworker. She looked at me for a moment, then said, "You seem lighter." I thought about that all the way home. Lighter didn't mean untouched. It meant I stopped carrying what wasn't mine. I started doing things just because they felt good, walking early in the morning, cooking meals I liked, leaving the TV off. I also started saying no without guilt, no to emotional labor. No to fixing people, no to shrinking, and slowly, without effort, I felt myself returning, not the woman I was before the marriage, someone clearer. One night, my phone buzzed with an unknown number. I didn't answer. Later, a voicemail appeared. I didn't listen, not because I was angry, because I was done reopening doors that took so long to close. That choice felt like power, not loud, not performative, just steady. Before bed, I stood by the window and watched the city settle into itself. Lights dimming, traffic slowing, a rhythm I hadn't noticed when my life was full of noise. I realized something important then: peace isn't the absence of pain. It's the absence of self-betrayal, and I had finally stopped betraying myself. Still, one final chapter remained, not about him, about how to carry what I learned forward. There's a moment after loss when you realize the world never stopped. It kept breathing, kept moving, and somehow you're still here inside it. Weeks passed, not dramatically, just steadily. Days folded into each other until the divorce stopped feeling like an event and started feeling like a chapter that had already been read. I stopped introducing myself as someone who had just gone through something. I didn't need the label anymore. One afternoon, I sat at my desk reviewing a small freelance job, numbers clean, patterns clear. My work had always grounded me. There was comfort in logic, in knowing that when you looked closely enough, things made sense. Life wasn't as neat as a spreadsheet, but it had rules. Ignore yourself long enough and the debt accumulates. Speak up early and the cost stays manageable. I thought about the women who might be living in the same quiet confusion I once did. Women mistaking endurance for love. Women believing that being easy to be with meant being valuable. I wished I could tell them something simple: pay attention to how you feel in the silence. If your body tightens when someone walks into the room, listen. If your voice gets smaller over time, notice. If you're always explaining away discomfort, stop. I didn't become stronger because I won in court. I became stronger because I stopped lying to myself. That truth followed me everywhere now, in how I chose my mornings, my work, my boundaries, in how I no longer laughed at jokes that cut too close, in how I walked away without apology when something felt wrong. One evening, I cleaned out the last drawer that still held pieces of my old life. I found a watch I'd given him years ago, expensive, thoughtful, meaningless now. I held it for a moment, then I donated it. Letting go doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes it looks like releasing objects that no longer carry memory, only weight. As the seasons shifted, so did I. I felt myself becoming more precise, more intentional. Less interested in chaos disguised as passion. I stopped romanticizing struggle. Peace became my standard. People sometimes asked if I'd ever date again. I smiled when they did. Yes, I said. But not the way I used to. Because love isn't supposed to feel like an audit where you're always justifying your worth. Love should feel mutual, clear, safe. If it didn't, I knew now how to walk away early. That was the real victory. Not revenge, not exposure, but discernment. One night, as I turned off the lights and stood in the quiet, I realized something that felt like a final exhale. I wasn't afraid of being alone anymore. I was afraid of abandoning myself again, and that fear, that one I planned to keep, because it reminded me who I'd become and who I refused to lose. Some endings don't announce themselves. They don't come with fireworks or dramatic speeches. They arrive like a door closing gently behind you, so softly you almost miss the sound. Months later, I woke up one morning and realized I hadn't thought about him in days. That realization stopped me, not because I missed him, but because the absence felt normal. I lay there listening to the city wake up. A car door slammed, someone laughed outside, somewhere a siren wailed and faded into distance. Life continuing, I made coffee and stood by the window like I always did, watching the light stretch across the buildings. The apartment felt settled now, lived in, safe, mine. I thought about the woman I used to be, the one who believed love meant enduring discomfort quietly, the one who confused loyalty with silence, the one who kept the peace by losing pieces of herself. I didn't judge her. She did the best she could with what she knew, but I also knew this: if I ever met her again, I would take her hands, look her in the eye, and say, "You don't have to be quiet to be loved." That truth stayed with me. It showed up in small ways. In how I spoke clearly instead of softly. in how I paused before agreeing, in how I trusted the discomfort instead of explaining it away. I didn't become hard, I became honest. Sometimes people ask if I regret how everything ended. I don't, not because it was painless, but because it was necessary. Regret lives in the space where you know better and still choose silence. I don't live there anymore. One evening, I stood in the same kitchen where the coffee once tasted wrong. I held the same mug, but this time the warmth felt right. I smiled, not wide, not forced, just real. There was no bitterness left, no need to prove anything, no desire to tell my story louder than it needed to be told. Because the lesson wasn't meant to punish anyone, it was meant to protect me. And if someone hears this story and feels a quiet recognition in their chest, if they pause and start listening to themselves a little more carefully, then the story has done what it was meant to do. Not to shock, not to shame, but to remind that silence isn't strength if it costs you your voice, that love shouldn't feel like survival, and that peace, real peace, comes when you stop betraying yourself. I turned off the light and stood in the dark for a moment, breathing evenly. The quiet didn't feel lonely, it felt earned. And I knew without doubt whatever came next, I would meet it as myself. If this story stayed with you, if any part of it felt familiar, you're not alone. Stories like this are told quietly, but they carry truth. And if you want to hear more real, emotional stories about strength, self-respect, and starting over, backhand index pointing right, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next one. Thumbs up, like this video if it spoke to you, it really helps more people find it. Speech balloon, comment below and tell me where you're listening from or what moment hit you the hardest. I read every comment. I've added 2 more powerful stories on your screen right now. Choose one, press play, and stay with me a little longer. Thank you for listening. Take care of yourself.